My name's Kirstie Stenhouse and I'm part of the acute leadership team in acute services. I manage strategically and operationally the AHPs which are in acute. So that would be the physios, the OTs, the dietitians, speech and language therapists and orthoptists. I think the most important one is to be authentic. If you're not yourself, you will feel exhausted and eventually it'll lead to burnout, and I think that's what we see in many people. I've done a lot of work on really trying to explore and understand what my personal values are, and that's work that I really encourage everybody to do, to really look at yourself and what is meaningful to you. So for me, my two personal values are connection and learning. So knowing these things allows me to use my energies to the best effect, so that I know that if I've not got much energy or if I'm feeling low, I need to tap into one of those values around connection or learning to improve my energy. But it also allows me to think, when I'm not feeling good, what could be going wrong in this situation. So for me, I get that stomach churn, I feel uneasy, I ruminate on things, what was going on there? And that allows me to really think, right, was it in relation to connection or was it in relation to my learning or somebody else's learning, so I can quickly understand what's going on and then get something in place to improve that situation and move out of that feeling of overwhelm and uncertainty. As part of my job as a leader, I really see that as somebody who's modelling leadership behaviours. So the more authentic I can be, it allows others to show that authenticity around me. We have a human need for getting that feedback from people, to feel that we are saying the right thing and doing the right thing. But to be authentic allows us all to use our own skill sets, our own knowledge base and our own experience. And that allows us to show up as ourselves, but also allows us to think uniquely. And I believe it's due to that diverse way of thinking and being that we will make the difference. So if we all think the same and we all try and model each other, we're never going to get there. We need the differentiation of each other. A lot of the work that I've done in my teams is to really allow people to remember who they are as individuals, as human beings, and allow them to come up with answers themselves. There's no way that I can support somebody to feel safe, well and heard if I don't feel that myself. So the work needs to be done around yourself first to ensure that you feel safe at work. There's lots of ways that I've managed that and explored that over the last few years. And the more work I do around that, the better impact I have at work and on the people around me, and I really see that. Some examples of what you might want to do to make sure that you're feeling safe, well and heard at work is to really understand how you are feeling, home into your own emotions, and just stop and pause and give yourself a minute to think, what am I feeling here? And there's a lot of emotions that overlap each other, and in the busyness that we live in within the NHS, we sometimes forget to check in, what am I actually feeling here? And if there is anxiety underlying things, there's a lot that we can do about that. We talk a lot about being anxious at work, and it is a state of being that many of us in the NHS find ourselves in every day. And as a leader, whether you're leading a small team or a really large team, there's a human need to protect others from being anxious. And I've got really interested in the research around this. And the first research was done back in the 1960s by a Scottish woman. And she looked at nurses and nursing students and really saw this pattern around trying to contain another's anxiety at work. And what she found, that when we did that, it resulted in a lot of harm for the people around us. So it actually worked in reverse. What we really need to do is give people the space to feel their own feelings. There's lots of research showing that that makes a huge amount of difference. To be able to release our emotions allows us to think more clearly. And that's what we all want to be able to do at work, is to be able to think clearly and to know what the right next step should be. So I'm really interested in that research that's been picked up again from the 1960s. Nobody really picked up on it again, but at the moment the King's Fund's doing a lot of work around that up and down the UK and looking at ways that we can manage people's anxiety, honour people's anxiety, and think, how do we support each other to manage our own anxieties. I'm somebody that's got a lot of emotions. I cry a lot at work. I am happy a lot at work. I'm sad a lot at work because we see a lot of sadness and grief around us. We're immersed in it every day. And the more I tap into understanding those emotions and releasing them, the better I can show up at work. It's really important to feel safe, well and heard, and think around how are you building that safe environment for others to be authentic, to be able to bring their whole self to work, to be able to name their emotions is really important. For a while, we've went down a route of having organisational values, having NHS Scotland values, but as I said before, I think the biggest thing is to understand our own personal values. And of course they're going to align with the values of the organisation we work in. There is advantages to having the values of the organisation, because that means that there's a sense of everybody in it together, that these are kind of the rule book of what we will follow. These are the boundaries that will not go without. And I think to have a value set often helps us with quite difficult conversations, or helps us with having conversations that can feel uncomfortable. It gives us a level playing field and an objectivity and a language that each of us can come back to. So there is some advantages to having those organisational values. I've used them in the past when I've been managing teams where there's been behaviours that do not align with the value set over what we would expect of somebody within the workplace. Now, usually when that happens, it's because somebody doesn't feel safe, well and heard. So we need to think of ways on how we can allow them to feel that belonging, that psychological safety, feel themselves again and be able to do what they're amazing at doing. One of the ways I've done this is introducing a values-based recruitment process. And that was a tool that I used to allow us to have more open discussions around our values and our feelings within teams. And that worked especially well within teams that have been feeling really bruised, both as individual practitioners within the team and as a collective team, exhausted, overwhelmed for very long periods of time, and displaying levels of burnout, yet still coming to work. So to look at using our values within a task that many of us are involved in on a very regular basis was a way to introduce conversations around our values within those teams. And it's been fantastic. It's allowed people to explore how they display those values as part of a recruitment process, from writing the person spec to what we say in the advert, to how we congratulate people on being shortlisted, to how we welcome people into the interview, to giving the people that are being interviewed the questions in advance to say, we're really ambitious for your performance at this interview and we'll do anything we can to make it as easy as possible for you to show up as you and perform really well in the interview. We also looked at ways that we provided support during an interview, really encouraging people and using all the evidence base around how we support people best to think. And then after the interview, how we provide feedback, how we offer feedback, and how we welcome feedback on our performance so that we can get it even better for the next set of interviews and the next set of candidates that we welcome in. And that really allowed people to think around how they were showing up with their value set at the same time as exploring candidates' value set and seeing if there was an alignment there. The feedback we got from that has allowed us to keep going with it. Not everybody was bought into the idea of it to start with, because it's a very different way to recruit. But when you hear candidates say, although I never got the job, I know that NHS Forth Valley is the place I want to work because I've actually enjoyed this process, learnt a lot about myself, and I know what to do better the next time. That's amazing feedback to get. So when I first came into post in acute, it was on a secondment. I wasn't sure if I was going to like it. Acute was never the place that I enjoyed being as a clinician. It was too fast-paced for me. There wasn't as much connection with patients as I got out in the community setting when I was seeing somebody in their own home environment with all their family around them. So I was a little nervous, but also curious to see how I would like coming in as a leader. And I have absolutely loved being in acute. But there's a lot of things that I noticed and a lot of things that I've worked through during my time on secondment and then going for the post on a permanent basis. And it was a huge decision with a lot of thinking behind it when I decided to apply for the post on a permanent basis. I had come from a service that I was hugely psychologically safe within. I'd been welcomed into that service and felt very, very safe. My opinion was valued. I was safe, I was well, and I was heard. But what was interesting to me was I didn't feel a belonging within that service. It was in a clinical area that didn't excite me. There was a language that I didn't understand, and there was multiple staff around me that absolutely belonged in that area. Their heart was in it as well as their mind. So that got me curious about the difference between being psychologically safe and having the sense of belonging. When I came into acute, I had a real sense of belonging. I spoke the language, I understood the strategies that we were working behind. I'd been immersed in clinical area around that flow between acute and community, and it felt like my place to be. However, it was hugely psychologically unsafe, and that was very difficult to come into. And I think the comparison of being in a service that I felt hugely safe in to come into a place that I wasn't safe, I wasn't heard, and therefore I was not well. And my learning for that has really shaped my leadership journey in the way that I lead others. Part of that picture when I came into acute that I felt like I belonged but I didn't feel psychologically safe was around my way of working, and the way that I see the world and my skill set is around that third horizon. Where are we going to be, not tomorrow, not next week, but in a few years' time? And that skill set was just not valued at the time within the acute setting. We struggled to think beyond the next hour, never mind the next year, and my voice wasn't heard. So I've had experience for a prolonged time of not feeling heard, and I understand the impact that that can have on people. I'm glad to say that's totally changed within acutes now, where all of our voices are valued equally, and it's really important to us as a senior leadership team that our voices, our experiences, our skill sets and our ideas are all very different, and that is what makes us a good team together. My learning within that and the journey that I've been on to now be in a position that I feel really safe in, I feel really heard in, that I feel very well in. I can be myself, I've developed myself, I'm developing services, and I feel excited to get up and come to work every day. That's been such a learning journey for me. What I've learned is it's the people around us that make all the difference, but also the culture and the structure around us. So there's something around that strategic part of it and something around the culture part, and then when we get those two things right, we can be safe, well and heard at work, and we can be excited about coming to work every day. The thing that made the biggest shift for me was to have stability in my leaders, in my line manager. So to me, success as a leader is having a happy team around me. And as a more strategic senior leader is being able to widen out that ripple, not just to the teams that I'm managing and responsible for, but much wider within the organisation. Before we had the culture programme, we were already developing as an organisation and paying attention to our ambitions around relationships and culture through our QI strategy. So I was leading on that priority within the QI strategy and started those initial conversations around the importance of relationships and the importance of culture within the organisation. So it was nice to initiate those conversations, and then the culture programme as a whole has come up in the background and really taken on and taken that to a much greater level. The other things I've been involved in that I've loved is again looking at that evidence base, looking at what's on the horizon, what are other people doing out there to allow people to feel safe, well and heard. And one of those things is been around the Spaces for Listening. Spaces for Listening was developed by a coach and a psychologist working together through those early stages of COVID, knowing how hard things were for people within the NHS. And they put together all the evidence base out there that allowed people to feel safe, that allowed people to think, and packaged it up into a programme, a methodology called Spaces for Listening. And that's something that really supported me through those early stages of COVID and continues to support me within how I show up on a daily basis, whether that's at work or outside of work. So I worked with some others to introduce Spaces for Listening within NHS Forth Valley. Again, it was a concept that was new to people and not everybody was bought into the idea. So when that happens, I've learned you just work on the edges of it. You just find people that have got that interest the same as you, and together that you just start that work. And now we've got to the stage for the last few years actually that Spaces for Listening is a programme within NHS Forth Valley. We've got a community of practice with other health boards out there, and if you're interested in being part of a space, you'll find the information on the internet around that. One of the things I noticed when I came into acute was just how fast the pace is in here. And whilst I understand that that pace needs to be fast clinically when people are acutely unwell and we have to respond really quickly to that, when we're looking at leadership, when we're looking at our connection with each other, our connection with ourselves, and our ability to learn and develop and reflect, that fast pace is counterproductive. So I've made a real intentional effort to slow the pace down when it comes to leadership within acute services, to allow space for thinking, allow space for development. And that's been quite hard at times, but when you see the impact of that, it keeps you wanting to go forwards. And I've really noticed a slowing down of many people within acute, taking that time out, whether it's a walk outside for 5 minutes, whether it's just taking a few seconds, even 30 seconds, to breathe and think differently. For many of us, our life is on Teams all day, every day when we come to work. And just taking that time out between calls to go and connect with somebody else is really important. So try and get your buffer in. Try and get your 5 minutes, your 10 minutes between calls, just to remember who you are, what you're here for, and what excites you. And then set your intentions for going into the next call. These coaching tricks can be really powerful. Alongside my day job, I'm a coach on the Coach Bank, and I meet people from all over the organisation and get a real insight into what's happening in people's lives. And that's such a privilege to have that insight. And I can see a lot of themes emerging then over the organisation because, of course, we all work in very different teams with different responsibilities. But at the end of the day, we're all human. We've all got the same human needs and we've all got the same human reactions to the situations that we find ourselves in. And I absolutely love being on that Coach Bank and meeting people and connecting with them and learning with them in that coaching relationship. I see in Forth Valley that we've shifted our understanding of what coaching is. When I first came here, there was a sense in some teams that coaching was a tool, almost like you were being reprimanded. You weren't performing well, you weren't doing things in a perceived way that was perceived to be correct, therefore let's go to coaching. Or you were really struggling at your work, or let's send you off to coaching, that'll fix you. But we've entirely moved from that now, and coaching's seen, I hope, as a much more positive experience. Since I went into my first coaching relationship being coached, which is probably about 9 years ago now, it's very rare for me not to have a coach in my life. And coaching's really allowed me to understand who I am, who I'm here to be, what I can do that other people can't do, what I can't do that I have to rely on other people to do, and find other people to fill that gap, and allow me to love my job. So one of the things that we've implemented here is to have a time in the week where me and my direct reports have space together. There's no agenda to that meeting. We just show up and we say what's on our mind, and we support each other with whatever is needing done in that moment and that time. In this really fast-paced environment, that can be quite difficult to come to a meeting when you've not got an agenda, when you don't know what you're going to get out of that meeting before you come into it. Just having time and space to be every week with no expectations of each other, with no expectations that any one of us will hold the answer or the solution, but to be able to show up and just say what's on our mind has been really helpful. Another thing that I've introduced as part of our one-to-one appraisal paperwork is to introduce within that a question around well-being. So my first test was to say, can you tell me about the well-being of your team? And that opened up lots of conversations that we didn't normally hear during that supervision session. Now, sometimes that's all we manage to cover. We don't get to the rest of the supervision paperwork, but to me, that's the most important thing. I noticed within that people were really keen to talk about the well-being of their team. They felt a sense of responsibility for that well-being. But within that, didn't think around their own well-being. So a second question was added: how's your well-being? How are you feeling today? How am I able to support you as your line manager around that? And what can I do differently for next month? Asking those questions and slowing things down is really helpful. So if you're a leader and you're looking to change things within your teams, I think it's really important to be intentional about it and be curious about it and really be creative about how am I going to do this? What might work? And have a discussion about that within your teams, because if you've not got the answer, somebody else will, and it's just about trying it out. Try it once and see how it works, get feedback from people, then try it a different way and tweak it. Being really intentional about what is it that I'm trying to do here is the most important thing. So when I look at myself early in my career, I didn't know who I was. I hadn't done that work to understand who I was as a person, what my value sets were, how I saw the world compared to how other people see the world, what my unique skill sets were. And I think you develop the understanding around that as you go through your career. Coaching's really helped me within that, reflecting and taking part in different learning activities and having some amazing mentors along my way. And that's allowed me to develop a sense of who I am authentically and to show up like that every day. But even still, there's periods in life that I don't get that alignment right. What's different now is I know straight away when I'm out of alignment and I can quickly fix that. But when I think of the times that that alignment's not been there, it has been when that overwhelm has kicked in. And when I think of those early days during COVID, it was a very rule-based structure. And that's where we can lose ourselves within a rule. Instead of thinking, how might I add to this situation, or how might I show up in this situation, we think, what's the rule here and how can I follow that? And that leads to often a real misalignment with being authentic. When we fall into that rule-based way of leading with commands and control, we lose sight of ourselves as humans, and that's where that disconnect comes in. So for anybody that's feeling they're at the start of their leadership journey, my advice would be, you're not at the start, you're pretty much well through it by now. I really believe that when we think about leadership, it is about leading ourselves first. And we all do that every day. We've all had years of experience of doing that. When we go into a formal leadership role, we can feel there's an expectation of us to perform in a set leadership style. We're socialised into this way of being within the NHS really quickly. So I like to take people back to their connection with themselves, to also remind them that there's lots of research base around this that they can tap into. So I'd encourage you to link into that research. I've got lots of my favourite researchers, and nowadays we're so lucky because we don't need to go to the library and delve into research articles. There's loads of podcasts out there to listen to. If you jump onto TikTok, if you jump onto Facebook, any of the social media stuff, if you get yourself onto LinkedIn, there's such amount of rich information out there to allow you to access that research, think about what it means to you and think about how you can then put that research into practice. Some of my favourite researchers are the ones that not only do the research, but they tell us and give examples of how we can put it into practice. They tell us the research in a way that we can understand it and is meaningful to us. So some of my favourites are Amy Edmondson and the work she's done around psychological safety, Kristen Neff and the work that she's done around self-compassion, Nancy Klein around her work around a thinking environment. So Nancy's done work to tell us what are the 10 components that we need to get in place to allow people to think and therefore perform at their best. That's given you some ideas of what you might want to do in your teams to allow your teams to think. So instead of trying to manage their anxiety, you're making the culture and the structure right so that they can think, and you're being ambitious for them instead of trying to contain them and make them safe. I've got Michael West with all his work around compassionate leadership. Simon Sinek's a great one to look at if you're looking for wee bite-sized things. And all these people, you'll be able to access them online, and you'll be able to get 2-minute, 3-minute, bite-sized things, or you can delve a bit deeper, read the books, get them on podcasts, get it on Audible, get out your walk at lunchtime and be listening to your book. There's also individuals that I've met along my leadership journey that I've connected with, and I think that's a really important thing, to find somebody that you can connect with that's got similar value set to you, or that you just understand the way that they're telling the story. One of those for me has been Sue Hetherington. So Sue used to be a chief executive of one of the NHS trusts down south. She's developed a concept and a way of being around quiet leadership called quiet disruptors. It tells us that we don't need to be the loudest person in the room to make the change, and sometimes it's the quietness and the way that we go about our work can be really disruptive and result in that transformational change. The other person that does this work really well with a daily audio blog is Julian Stodd and his work around being a humble leader. And the other group of people that's been really supportive to me is the International Futures Forum. They do a lot of free gatherings that you can attend online or face-to-face, and they've got some excellent leadership programmes around how we cope within the uncertainty and the complexity that we all work in, not by trying to control it, but we're working through. So if you're keen to develop your skills as a leader, leading yourself or leading others, there's lots of tools out there that you can use to understand who you are, where your blind spots might be, what you might want to work on. And we've all heard of different tools like Wellbeing team roles, Myers-Briggs. The one that I've been using lately is called Human Design. I found that really useful to understand who I am, how I make decisions in the world, what do I see that others don't see, where are my blind spots, and I found that really helpful. So there's lots of tools out there. Just find one that floats your boat and stick with it for a while and do your learning, do your reflections, and get a coach alongside you or a mentor alongside you or both, and just have fun exploring who you are and what you're here to do in the world.